Welcome, y'all. Thanks for coming out. My name is Dan Turner. I'm Head of Programming and Outreach for the Georgetown County Library. And we've been running this series, the Shared Traditions series, which explores the profound enrichment of American life through African-American cultural experiences with a particular focus on South Carolina and especially on the Low Country here. Contributions right here in the Low Country, and even more particularly, Georgetown County, although we'll spread down Highway 17 a little bit further today and pick up a really important figure from Charleston area with Dr. Brown. But this whole project has been made possible by a generous Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, administered by the South Carolina State Library. So we're very grateful to those institutions for making this possible and enabling us to bring in to our library folks like Dr. Millicent E. Brown, who is a renowned figure in the civil rights movement. She's a retired associate professor of history. Her last stop was Claflin University, but she taught at several other institutions of higher learning. She's, I guess, educator would be, in a word, one thing she's been doing all her life, a lifelong educator. Dr. Brown serves as an expert consultant with museums, historical sites, other organizations in the community who are seeking more accurate analyses of social justice initiatives. She's a lifelong community advocate, and she will talk today about this wonderful book. And we might ask her about the title. She'll probably mention something about it, but this incredibly provocative title, wonderful title, Another Sojourner, Looking for Truth, My Journey from Civil Rights to Black Power and Beyond. So I've got my copy, but you should get your own, and so we can set you up with that afterwards with your own copy of this wonderful life story that's not just about Dr. Brown, but it's interwoven with the history of our state, of the Low Country, of South Carolina, civil rights and school desegregation here, but it's a national story and even global. So it just, you pull a thread and it just keeps going. So please, it's our honor and our delight to welcome Dr. Brown. So please.
Thank you so much. I brought my cheering squad. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Got to do a couple of things. First of all, I tell you, I will be quite casual with this. I'll probably be walking all around the room. I hope it doesn't make you nervous, but I spent enough years teaching school to not like standing behind lecterns anymore. And I really, really prefer that when we talk and about the book, whatever, that we see it as a conversation, as opposed to a lecture. I don't. My lecturing days are gone. That's what I'm trying to say. Need to recognize Ron Days, who I understand kicked off the lecture series this year, and glad that you were able to come out. We go back a way, but I'm really glad that you were able to join me. Yeah. I want to recognize someone else in the audience who I will probably have a chance to explain a little bit more about. But my friend Ellen Solomon is here with me today. Ellen was first reader for the book, and she is a professional editor, and so I had the good fortune of having a friend who actually knew what she was doing, you know, when she read the first version. And I can still hear Ellen over the months that we worked, you know, oh, this is good, you know, you got to get this out. And I said, well, Ellen, come on now, we need to clean it up a little bit. No, this is good, you know, they'll like this, you know. And so she really was responsible for keeping me motivated and encouraged, because I had some problems with figuring out why a memoir, my story, was going to appeal to people. I just could not quite decide that what I had to say was really going to be that important. And Ellen was very helpful for just helping me see that, yeah, but others can relate to some of these same experiences, and there is value to talking about them. So I appreciate her efforts for sure. Let me start with this idea of another sojourner looking for truth. That wasn't the original title that I had in mind. I had something else in mind that we decided that didn't really capture what I was going to end up saying. And so I was asked to go back and think of something else. And I was mad because I thought my title was just fine. But I did go back and I said, okay, then what is the gist of this memoir? What really is it? And I chose the word another very carefully, because one of the things that I talk about is that I have an impatience with the way not only African American history, but I think history generally, especially US history, elevates some people almost to the exclusion of so many others. And so the word another was a way to emphasize that, you know, this is one person talking about her life for sure, but I was always surrounded by other people. And it's an important point for me, because I think as we certainly value people's sacrifices, all the things that they've contributed, whoever they may be, I just like to say, let's not forget the other folks that were around them, because nobody does anything by themselves. And so while we talk a good bit about civil rights activities and the school deseg stuff, you know, whatever the issues are, there was never a one person who was driving it all. And so another was a very carefully chosen word for that reason. Sojourner, I admit there was a little bit of play on the whole idea of sojourner truth, and it was a little hokey, I know, but the sojourner part was, never was this book intended to be a how to do anything. You know, it was a reflection for sure of some of my experiences, but the sojourner part was about just going through life as I think all of us have, and just having different experiences. I wanted to capture this idea of moving around. And what I saw, I started off in Charleston. I'm Charleston born and reared. And it was like, that's where we get started. And then you go this place, and then you go up north, and then you go out west, and you know. And so it's this sojourn, this physical movement as well as philosophical movement over time. The word looking was also very purposefully chosen. I started to say searching, and I said when people search for something, they usually know what they're looking for. I said looking conveys, I'm just observing along the way. You know, there was never a point in time when I was so sure of almost anything. And so looking was the idea to convey just keeping eyes, mind, and heart open and trying to learn from the experiences as I moved around. And so the looking for truth, truth is a funny word to use. I define it in the context of this book as just, I've been trying since I was a child to figure out how are Black folks going to fit into American society? What is that all about? What is that, some people would call liberation, but how are we going to finally combat this whole notion of white supremacy that has plagued this country from the very beginning? And so the truth that I'm talking about is, how do we break it? How do we break down the bonds? I mean, what is it that's going to get folks equity, parity, equality, justice, all of that stuff, you know? That's what my truth was about. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but we're going to stop and y'all are going to have to ask me some questions, okay? If there's anybody, let's see, besides Richard and Ellen in the audience, anybody else has read the book yet? Okay, that makes a difference now, because I can't tell you everything, because you'll never want to buy the book or read the book if I just tell you everything. So I've got to hold back a little bit, you know, but and just encouraging you. And I say buy. Love if you buy it, love if you order the audio version, love if you borrow it from your library, whatever it is. I really want people to engage this book. Yes,
Are you narrating the
I got to narrate it. I had to audition. They said, we have professional, you know, narrators. And I said, but it's my book, it's my memoir, you know. And they said, well, we send in an audition tape. And so I passed the audition, and I actually got to do it. Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm really glad. I've had some good responses from that. I think it does make a difference. It's my story. I knew where to put the emphasis. I knew what word I really wanted to, you know. So I'm glad that I had a chance to do that. The book was asked of me. It wasn't that I decided it was time to necessarily write this. I was asked to write it by the University of South Carolina Press. They said that the role that I had played back in 1963 had some greater, broader value, and they just thought that I should really try to share that story. I have done enough academic writing over the years that I said, I do not want to write a history book. I really don't. And so they too agreed that it would be memoir. You know, it was not meant to be the definitive description of the middle of the 20th century. You know, it's me trying to share and humanize as much as I possibly could as many of the experiences that I went through and others went through, you know, at the same time. And so it is that. And I tell folks, if you are of the same age or if you know people around the same age and you saw it differently, fine. Make sure you get to writing your version. You know, I just wrote mine of how I perceived how things went. I almost always begin by saying that the essence for me of describing whatever it is I'm going to talk about is based on two concepts. The first being when you were born and to whom. And I really wrestled with that. It's like, you know, what makes my story particularly engaging, if it is? And it's when you're born squarely in the middle of the 20th century. You know, you got to respond to what is going on in society. And so I happened accidentally, I mean, I had nothing to do with it, but I come to this earth, right in the middle of some great transitions. And therefore, as a youth on up to teenage and college age and adulthood, I then am part of what all that activity is all about, and I didn't choose it. It's just when I did. The thing about To Whom You're Born, I was very, I think, fortunate to be born into a household with parents, particularly a father, who was very engaged in civil rights activities. And so from my earliest recollections, our household was talking about change. Our household was talking about unfairness, inequity. And so as the local president of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, an organization while founded, ever since 1912, or is that a Sala? Anyway, in Charleston, our first branch was 1917. But it's an old organization. Now people talk about NAACP as kind of, you don't hear them being on the front line or whatever. I'm talking about a time when the NAACP was thought to be close to a terrorist organization. I mean, that's how it was really described. It was communist-led. It was all of this other kind of fear-mongering. And so the NAACP that I was raised in was out front doing all kinds of things. And some of you in this room, I'm sure, can remember back that far. It was... How can I put this? It was a group that was trying to say multiple things. To the Black community, it was saying it is time that we really organize because we have to stop some of the atrocities. We're coming out of an era, Jim Crow era, of the horrors, not only that slavery had brought, but lynching. And after Reconstruction, we get into Jim Crow legislation that is going to keep people, marginalized and everything. And so I grew up in a household where folks are saying, come on, folks, this is not the way it has to be. We have got to believe in change. There are some laws being passed. There are some Supreme Court decisions being made. Black folks are now going to be allowed into the military. I mean, at every stage, there's something happening that is saying, we just got to keep on, keep on, keep on. We're going to get into this thing we call the American, dream, whatever. But you got to convince people that it's possible. And so I came up in a house where that was what the real issue was. How do we convince Black folks that we can make a difference? How do we convince white people that this thing is crazy? You are suffering from this false belief that you're better than somebody. And we want to shake you out of that too, because all of this is nonsense. And so there are lessons that are coming to any group, be you white, Black, or brown, whatever. It's how do we believe in change? How do we go about bringing about change? And how do we convince people that this change is going to benefit everybody? It really, really is. My father, very early after the Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Ed, Topeka, Kansas, 1954, he and my mother signed my sister up and others in the community, about a dozen others, to challenge the Charleston schools. And my sister became a senior in high school. And the challenge had been out there for years and years. South Carolina said, we are not budging. You know, y'all can have all the Supreme Court decisions you want, but South Carolina is not going to change. So 1954 comes and goes, and the Minerva Brown, that's my sister's name, Minerva Brown, case continues. She becomes a senior, and the Charleston School Board says, case is moot. She's about to graduate. There is no point in continuing, so throw it out, and y'all have to start the legislative process all over again. And my father took great pride in saying he had another ace up his sleeve. And so he was able to get somebody in the courthouse to take Minerva Brown's name off and insert Millicent Brown. I was in the 7th grade, I think, when that happened. Now, y'all know I don't know any of this is going on, right? Okay. And we have this case actually being copied around the state. There are folks in Orangeburg, Beaufort, I'm sure all over, probably even Georgetown. I'm not sure, I had to check my records. But Greenville, Spartanburg, Rock Hill, you know, there are other children trying to do the same thing. But our case ended up being the initial one. It stayed in my name for 3 more years. And so by 1963, the Charleston case gets decided 9 years after Brown versus Board of Ed, Topeka, Kansas. And I stress that because that's a decade, y'all. That's a decade of resistance. And that's a decade of convincing people we are not going to integrate and whatever, you know. And that's a decade of just building up enemy forces and resistance that I think made it more problematic when we finally did desegregate, because you'd had time to convince people how bad it was going to be. And so in 63, the children have changed. Some of them have graduated like my sister. Some of them have just said, forget it, they dropped out. So there's a different group of people that are involved in my case. So the Millicent Brown et al., meaning and others, are not the same ones from before. That cast of characters has changed. And when we go into the schools in 63, I'm one of the older ones. There's a young man who's a senior. I'm in 10th grade, and the rest are in 8th. And the majority of the 11 of us are in 4th and 3rd grade. And thus, with all of that background, I say, one of the major reasons for finally getting to writing this memoir was I really want people to understand that school desegregation was a national phenomenon, especially going on at the time of the 50s and 60s in the South, for sure. But it doesn't belong to historians and to political scientists. You know, this case versus that case, and Thurgood Marshall argued, and, you know, that's all fine. I want to make sure we remember those were children. Those were children who were being asked to change society, because that's what our job was. We were supposed to go in, and there's some references to it in the book about, you know, what is that weight that you carry? I went in, I remember in 63, a nervous wreck the night before, the first day. Why am I nervous? Do I think that the mobs are going to come. No, we had a very reasonable police chief who had said, we are not going to have any of that Mississippi, Alabama violence. So Charleston and South Carolina was, I think, very lucky that there was some, people didn't want it to happen, but they said, we're not going to resort to that kind of show of violence. So I'm not even worried. I don't know all this, but I'm not worried about whether there are going to be folks trying to hurt me physically or whatever. I'm 15 years old. I wonder what my hair is going to look like, because I have to represent the whole race. And I can't go out there with my hair looking there. Back in the day, people were not as comfortable wearing their hair natural. This is in the early 60s now. So people are not, women are not necessarily wearing their hair in its natural state. And so I had always what they called straightened my hair with a straightening comb. Y'all remember? Okay, y'all remember standing at the stove with the straightening comb to make your hair look straight, because that's how respectable black folks were supposed to look, okay? And I have another sister who's in college. She has come home with this wonderful thing that she's going to do my hair, but she's going to, instead of using a straightening comb, she's going to use this ointment, this blue ointment called Dippity-Doo. And she's going to roll my hair up in rollers with this Dippity-Doo lotion on it, and it's going to make me presentable and, just beautiful, right? And so the day before we go into the schools, I am a nervous wreck, because it dawns on me well into the evening, my hair is all rolled up in the curls and everything. My sister and I don't have the same great hair. Her hair is softer than mine. This thing might have worked on her hair, but that doesn't mean it's going to work on mine. So I'm just nervous because, again, I'm going out there to represent all black folks. And that is part of the whole burden of that whole experience. And it weighed on me. The hair turned out fine. If you're looking at there's a picture in the book about it, and there's actually some newspaper coverage. The hair turned out okay. I didn't embarrass anybody. But then it went on into, again, this idea of what does it mean to go to this school, and everybody's judging you as to whether or not, well, we don't think black folks are very smart. So you got to make sure you get good grades, because if you don't, you're going to embarrass black people, and that kind of thing. If you don't dress appropriately, if you don't talk the right way, children all over this country are going through that. At the same time, not all, but many are being marginalized, being ostracized. And one young woman who was part of our case told me many years later, you don't know what it's like when you're a third grader and they won't jump rope with you. And she gave me a story about how one day the little white girls at her school, her elementary school, asked her to jump, to come over while they were playing jump rope, and they wanted her to throw the rope, which is the way of meaning to turn it. So you're throwing the rope. But they wouldn't let her ever participate in jumping, which was the fun part. When you're in third grade, that kind of thing makes a difference. And so, as I was saying earlier, one of my concerns has been, let us not go on off into the 21st century, the way we talk to our children, our grandchildren, our students, or whoever else, and talk about school desegregation as if, well, there was Brown versus Board of Ed, and then we had the March on Washington, and then everything was okay after that. It's like, no, let's just take time and remember, those were children. And we haven't studied them. We haven't found out what happened to them. We don't, you know, I've always said that good social scientists would be asking questions. You know, there would be studies, I think, if thousands of white children had gone through something like this at the same time, I think we'd have some data. And so, literally, I have been encouraging and am still involved with trying to collect as many stories as possible, collecting oral histories of children. We call them first children, but some of the ones who were the first to go into the schools. Some of these kids had a marvelous experience, whether you're talking Baltimore, whether you're talking Chicago, Philly, Orlando, Columbia, I mean, wherever it is, you're going to find some folks that said, hey, I had a great education. I'm glad I had the opportunity to go to a school that had good resources, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I don't ever want people to think that this is a phenomenon that was just all gloom. It wasn't. But as we're learning, as time goes on, people are beginning to come out. They're writing memoirs, they're writing dissertations, they're doing oral histories, and they're saying how devastated so many of us were, you know, being ignored, being called names, being marginalized, whatever. Some people did not fare very well. And I talked to a woman just recently, within the past year, who admitted that after being a first child in 4th grade, she said, my personality changed completely. I used to be a happy little girl, and she said, I've never been happy for the rest of my life. Broke my heart. Different experiences, because we are all so different. So some people, you know, did just fine. Others did okay, and then others actually had some really bad experiences. We as a society need to just appreciate that and don't ever talk about certain challenges like school deseg and forget the human part of that story, you know. I left Charleston. I was so glad to get out of South Carolina. I said, this is enough. I went to that school for 3 years. Wasn't all bad. Wasn't all good either. You know, it was just it was what it was. But I got on, made it on through. Fortunately, had a very strong support system in my family as well as my community. You know. And I said, I got the answer to this white-black problem. So I'm going to freedom. And where do I go? Boston. Lord have mercy. Boston. I ran into more discrimination and ugliness up there than I ever knew. My father had always said, since we were kids, my father had this saying, the South is anything below Canada. And I didn't understand that. I thought you're going to have the segregation and discrimination in the South, and you go north to freedom. And so part of my sojourn was the going north and discovering, this thing is not cut off geographically like that. It's not that simple. But there are other experiences that I try to share when I also thought it was also, the problem is white folks, white folks. And so by the time I'm older and I'm grown, I'm exposed a little bit more, I'm realizing, wait a minute, all the white people I know in the world aren't ugly acting and treating me like dirt. Something's wrong here, Millicent. It's not South versus North. It's not even always white versus black. It's attitudes about white supremacy. And I had to adjust my thinking. It took me a long time, but I had to try to make the distinction between white people and white supremacy, the belief in it. Yes, Ron, you were going
Was your trip to Boston post high school?
Yeah, I went to college.
You went to college.
Mhm.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Emerson in Boston. Yeah, yeah. And no. I went up there for a while, and after a year and a half, I said, this is not happening. We're talking about a real period in time now. This is 69, 68, 69. This is when around the nation, all kinds of things are happening, all kinds of altered analyses are going on. Integration is not the point all the time. It's also about claiming and loving ourselves as African-derived people. And so the Black Power movement has really taken off. Trying to say to Black folks, don't look at everything from this European perspective. Let's get to figuring out who we are and why we are and understanding what it means to be of African descent. So I want to leave Boston because I'm going to go to a Black college. See, so I'm going to go to an HBCU, historically Black college. All my family had been, So I transfer down to one of the most elite bourgeois Black schools that there was. The activist group on that campus had 9 members in it, counting me, And so it was like, that really blew my mind. It's like, wait a minute, I thought that was, and it was a safe space in some ways, but it was still not engaging. It wasn't a community that was really trying to push for change in the way that I felt needed to be. And so I'm glad for the experiences of Boston. I'm glad for the Atlanta experiences. But finally, I said, something, maybe the problem is just me and education and college. So I dropped out for a while, And I worked with a wonderful, wonderful organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and worked in Mississippi for a few years and did some fantastic things. Number one, I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I think number one, even though it was around me in Charleston, but I didn't understand it, when I worked in Mississippi, I understood the difference between formally educated people and brilliant people who have no formal education. And I had the opportunity to work with brilliant Black folks, even though they did not necessarily know how to read or write. And so that's a part of the sojourn as well. That's a part of the just expanding. And it's like, get rid of all the simple solutions, Millicent. It's not north-south. It's not just white-black. We got to figure in class. We got to figure in economics. We've got to figure in global politics. I'm introduced to things like African dancing and African art, and it's like, ooh, they didn't tell us about this, And so there's just this rich kind of going on and on and on, and I'm realizing, forget the simple answers. That's the main thing. Look for the deeper reasonings behind things so that you're careful not to just categorize people based on what you think they're going to be about. Because the Black folks disappointed me when I turned to them. The white folks disappointed me when I turned to them. Then I found other allies. It's like you just got to learn how to do some deeper thinking and deeper analysis of where are these problems really coming from. The book goes on to just kind of talk about somebody who got old and decided, yeah, I'm going to try to put these thoughts together. And I'd be glad to entertain any questions at all that any of you might have about anything that I've said. I'm wide open to you, for sure. Because otherwise, I'll just keep on going on talking and talking and talking. So I need to stop and let you get in.
What's the name of the book, Sojourner?
Oh, you want the book?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Ron?
would you say it was worth it?
The school stuff or the whole sojourn?
The whole.
Oh, the whole.
Sojourn, the whole, the integration, being in on that wave. There's a question I'm asked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. It's worth it because the oral history project that I began a number of years ago and am continuing through the College of Charleston at the Avery Research Center for African American Life, African American History and Culture, I'm sorry. The name of that oral history project is called Somebody Had to Do It. And so to answer your question, it's worth it because somebody's got to step up and do that. It happened to be me because of my father and my community, you know. And so, yes, it's worth it because I think we were having to get rid of legal segregation. Where there is a little bit of angst, where there's a little bit of almost resentment. I found out later when I started teaching college that we didn't teach this story very accurately. I had young Black students come to me and say, well, Dr. Brown, you talk about when you went to all Black schools. When we hear all Black, we think ghetto. I said, ghetto? You know, and I realized some decades had gone by. We'd been teaching that the reason for integration was so Black folks could get a good education. We were getting wonderful educations in most of our schools with very little resources. But the lack of resources got translated to the people. Inferior resources started being called the inferior people. And that saddened me because I said, I want a part of that. I had some wonderful teachers. I love my school, my all-Black school, and I don't want anybody to ever tell me differently. You know, the love and concern and compassion that those teachers had, I'd give anything to have it back today. Not all-Black schools, but I'm saying just the caring. And I hated that, unfortunately, we had sort of said, we just did that simplicity. We said, if you want to get a good education, you have to go to a white school or a majority white school. And that, unfortunately, is still being said sometimes out there. And so I'm real careful that we try to make sure we make the distinction. I tell people, you know, when public schools, even back during segregation, it wasn't a pot of money that Black taxpayers put in for the Black schools and white taxpayers put in for the white schools. You know, everybody's money went into the same pot. We just didn't get our share. See? So that means what? Part of this civil rights activism that we're talking about through integration is economic. It's Black folks saying, don't take our tax money, but we don't get whether it's the schools or the streets or the whatever. It's economic as well as it is moral and about the whole principle of stopping white supremacy. But we don't often add that economic to it. We forget that we've been paying taxes and not getting our share. And that's what the demand is.
I'm just interested, you've told me that Burke gave you a better education than Rivers did. And since I graduated from Rivers before you, I can well understand that the white public school was dismal, terrible. Unless you were interested in science, and we had one good teacher who was a science teacher. But it was not that white people were getting good education. But they thought they were.
Oh, I was in Winyo High School and all.
You were in Winya. But again, it's because we were not together, you know, I didn't know what kind of education white kids got. I just know that I had never seen a locker. And I didn't go to Rivers till I was in 10th grade. But Burke didn't have lockers. I'd never seen a school locker. I just thought, oh my goodness, this is a fancy school, you know. You got a locker to put your stuff in, you know. And had a lab that actually had, you know, the equipment for doing, you know, the dissection and the whatever, you know. So it was resources that I was certainly aware of and clear that we are not trying to say that if I have a white teacher, I'm going to be smarter. It was, how do we make people understand that? Again, even today, I think we have to make sure we add that when we tell the civil rights story. Because it's been confused, and there are kids now who are struggling because they don't quite know how to negotiate that, you know. And they're going to some of these charter schools or private schools or whatever, which is fine. You know, it's not to say don't, but they're kind of confused. You know, how do I go and be a part of, but I'm still Black? And it's just that confusion. And it continues to this day, I think, if we're not having honest discussions like this about it.
In your book, and I imagine there are individuals who were part of the desegregation, African Americans, said they had a good experience. For those who said they had a good experience, what did they contribute this to as opposed to some of the adverse stories?
There were some situations where white students were welcoming, or teachers. A lot of times they'll mention if they had teachers that treated them fairly, you know, and respected their abilities and helped them get into good schools and all that kind of stuff, you know. It all is very individual, Ron, you know, but it usually had to do with those things. But I have to go back, though. It depended on what kind of attitude they took with them. You know, if you came out of a home where there was already created a foundation of self-worth, you know, you can go anywhere, shoot, you know. So some people went in just sort of understanding. One girl told me, she said, I figured they were lucky to get me. You know, so when you had that kind of self-image, then certainly it made for a better experience.
Being positive.
Huh?
I said being positive.
Yes. Yeah, and there was some, that was it, you know. I was a positive person, but a lot of it was false. You know, I was known for smiling all the time, you know, and people thought that meant everything was going well, you know, and the inside things weren't going so well, you know, but that was my defense. That was my shield, you know. Nobody could ever say Millicent wasn't smiling. You know.
They say sometimes fake it until you make it.
Fake it until you make it. That's exactly what it was. I was faking it till I made it. That's right. Any other questions though? Yeah.
As an activist and all that you've experienced during the different time periods up to now, how do you feel about the current state of the Black collective in America and then some of the discrepancies in school curriculums? It comes down to misinformation about what African American children are being taught about their own people in this country, and how some parts of some curriculums downplay actually happened, like during the transatlantic slave trade and the antebellum period, Jim Crow, like all of that. Because there are some schools that teach those things just as accurately as they teach the rest of American history. And then there are some school districts where there's like a stark lack of right information, like there's a big misinformation being taught. And how does that affect our children?
Well, I think you already know.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing.
Collective, as it stands today, is that something that everyone should be able to see? Like, not just us, but should everyone be able to see that? Is there a reason why it's not on the
I honestly and sincerely think that it goes back to something I said a while back. We've got to see the insincerity, the inaccuracy in education as being the problem for everybody. You know, it's not black folks' problem to fix the fact that we can't seem to even get written into the canon, you know, that we can't get our history to be portrayed, you know, with accuracy. It's everybody's problem, because people are continuing to train children who then think that, you know, those are some sideline folks or whatever, especially here in South Carolina, you know, here in the low country, Dan, you know, my gosh, with the population being as it is, we're still, that's what the work that Ron and Natalie Days do, among others, the idea that can we make sure that the black problem, you know, is renegotiated, because it's a problem for the entire nation, for everybody. And we just have to, I think, speak up to that and call on allies to say, you don't want your child to be educated, whether you're rich, poor, whatever, but you don't want your child to be educated with this narrow understanding of what the past really was about.
As an activist, like, where do you, just what's your opinion on the state of the Black collective right now?
I think there's a lot of energy going out in every community. People are trying to identify something, whether it's police brutality, whether it's inadequate education, healthcare, housing. I mean, there's a lot of energy that people are doing. I think where history really serves us well is we need to understand, when did communities get splintered? See, while I don't defend segregation, I know that there was something about us having communities that were supportive of each other, and, you know, and then you get the highways, the connectors, the overpasses and the bridges around this nation that destroyed Black and brown communities. And then that separation hasn't been fully appreciated. It means a lot, if you know anything about Charleston. Here we were all going to school together and whatever, living next to each other, different income levels, but still being supportive. And now we're in West Ashley, some of us in North Charleston. You got split up in Charleston. It's halfway. It's like we need to appreciate that some of the dysfunction and the inability to draw together collectively has some historical reasons. And a lot of it has to do with the destruction of communities. Deliberate. It was done all over the nation. It was done all over the nation. Sometimes it was called, what was that expression? Urban renewal. Yeah, yeah. And forgive me for being crass, folks, but to many of us, you know, urban renewal was called nigger removal. Yeah, that was what we called it, because it meant wherever you were getting rid of Black folks, and you were building luxury this or hotels or whatever it was. But it wasn't just happening in any one place. It was happening all over. I call that in some way systemic. A way that our communities were not valued. That's not excusing a lot of apathy that still exists in many Black communities, but I think we need to understand where we've been weakened and talk to that. Don't blame folks, but understand whether it was still working at minimum wage jobs in states that will refuse to increase the minimum wage. That's a suppression that is going to be hard to beat, because poverty breeds a lot of these problems, you know. So it's sad. I just say, if I'm being a little bit Pollyannish, but it's when all of us, or most of us, start taking on some of that responsibility and stop acting like black folks, y'all need to go fix this. You know, you don't have the power dynamics for fixing all of this. And we need a collective view of what is moral, what we consider to be truthful, you know, what is humanistic, you know. We got to get more people standing up for that, I think. I hope that addresses your concern in some way. Yeah. Because otherwise we just think, I've been saying for years, you either think that the reason you can go to any city in this nation, any city, and the same people are at the bottom. Now you got two choices. Either there's something wrong with them folks because they cannot seem to make it, or there is something systemic that keeps the same people down. I don't know but two choices. And I happen not to believe in the innate inferiority of anybody, you know. So we need to explore, well, what happened in that community where all of a sudden all the middle-class blacks who could, they were able to get out of this area. Well, what did you leave? You left all the black folks who were poor. You created a ghetto. You see, it was not just natural. We have to explore how things, if we're going to really understand how to repair. Any other? Yes, Ellen?
And then you end up at Claflin, so I mean, and you say you're going to do a course at College of Charleston, which is like maybe 10% black. So what do you see as like today, you know, going to HBCU versus a predominantly white institution, or, you know, aren't we still segregated in some ways? We have at least 2 elementary schools, you know, in this county that are all black. But I mean, there's a value in caucus. But I mean, how do you see things today?
I don't mean to sound like I'm dodging answering. I don't have a real good answer. I really don't. But I will say this. I think we have to accept the fact that we want children to be well educated. If I happen to live in an all-black community and everybody in my classroom is black, fine. I still want a good education. Do I want to see us separate like that? No, but that's a problem mainly because of residential, you know. My thing is, are we looking for a kind of a value to education? And do I want children to get to know each other who are different from each other? Yes. But if it doesn't happen organically, you know, I don't want somebody to think because I'm in an all-white school, that makes me better. Or if I'm in an all-black school, that makes me worse. You know, whoever you're with, are we setting our standards for good exposure and education for everybody? Yeah, because we got to watch that mindset. We got to watch the mindset. The kids that go to school and are still thinking that I've achieved something because I'm the only black kid in this class. You know, we got to watch that child, because they're not going to likely be able to go out into the world and really represent and be supportive of their own communities, because they're still judging everything by white is better than black. You know, we just got to be as honest and upfront about that as we possibly can, you know. I appreciate the time to just talk with you and answer whatever questions. You still have one? Well, sure, yeah. I'm just watching the time, but I mean, that's up to Dan. It's up to you to call me.
Last point.
Okay.
What I'm gonna say is so significant, because you were so, what's the word?
My cheerleader.
You were so adamant and so hungry for truth and searching school. Did you, were you able to finish the normal 4-year project or beyond?
Yeah, I went with the, it came after 5 years. I went back and graduated from the College of Charleston. And then got my master's at the Citadel. Now, that was a trip. But they had been so busy fighting having women that they had gotten past that. So my being over there, you know. Anyway, and then I went on to get a terminal degree. Every step of the educational level that I took was not because I necessarily was striving for it. It was, I had the bachelor's and I had this job, and then I realized, you're going to be stuck. You know, you need some more education if you want to, you know. And then I did that for a while and then realized you're going to be somebody's assistant all the time if you're going to be in this arena without a doctorate, you know. So it was about every stage sort of kept pushing forward. It wasn't like I had this grand design that I'm going to do whatever. It was just this stage took me to the next one, and I stayed open to possibilities, and that took me to the next one. Yeah. Thank you for asking, though. Yeah.
Tell us your original title.
The original title was going to be Light, Bright, and Damn Near. There's an expression in the Black community that was known as light, bright, and damn near white. And it referred to people who were light-skinned. And all that awful stuff about if you looked whiter, you were whatever. And there were privileges given sometimes to people who were lighter. And so I wanted a title that kind of just played at that. You know, because I had decided I'm tired of being ashamed of my complexion. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being defensive and proving that I don't think I'm better than some. You know, I was tired. And when you get to be 70-something years old, you just say, hey, enough of this foolishness, you know. So I wanted this book to kind of poke fun at that concept of light, bright, and damn near white. But they said I didn't talk about color consistently. But wasn't that what it was, Ellen? They said I didn't talk about it throughout the book. So they felt that.
I thought that was a terrible title.
Yeah, you didn't like that title.
Because I felt that it was focusing on one aspect of your life, and your life is so rich and full that it should not just be that.
Yeah, and I finally agreed with her and the other folks at the press. Yeah.
When you were SNCC, were you still doing voter registration? Because that was like 1970, right?
No, this is in the 60s. Yeah, doing voter registration for sure. But also really challenging economic systemic change, you know. And political, you know, there's times when you didn't find black police chiefs and black bears and everything, you know. This is still new territory in a lot of places.
In Mississippi, was the Delta, or?
I worked throughout the whole state, but I was based in Jackson, yeah.
But did you grapple with the issue of complexion in the finished product at all?
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't central to it.
Yeah.
But do you?
I raised questions about it. Yeah, it was addressed. It was just, they just said it wasn't addressed throughout the whole thing, because I talk about other things so much, yeah. Yeah, because that's a whole book on colorism and the harm that it has done over time. But again, going back to this young sister's question here, see, but how do we get to be light-skinned? See, nobody wants to talk about that, okay? You know, and you know what I'm saying? So let's talk about what it means and miscegenation and all that, you know, and quadroons and, you know, a drop of black blood. I mean, it brings it back to let's examine how did these things happen? And when did people start being given privileges because of, you know? You got to understand stuff and just not accept it on its face. That's my big thing, you know? And that's my challenge to everybody in this room. I'm going to end by saying that one of the things I really urge people to do in terms of anything regarding some of the sensitive topics that we've talked about today, whether it's a knitting club, a yoga class, a book club, a bowling team, I don't know, whatever you do, you have the obligation and opportunity to speak some of this truth. You don't have to be head of some big organization. You don't have to be some leader in whatever. We have got to just be willing to speak these truths in whatever circle that we find ourselves. Now, that's how we get the collective working on some of those projects, on those problems, you see. Because that whole thing about not being silent in the face of, you know, when you hear discriminatory things, when you hear just inaccuracy, you know, we all have the obligation to say something about it. We really do. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, all of you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming, too, in all the rain. I have, yeah. Yeah.